the morning sun rose over the sacred city of Tenochtitlan, casting long shadows across the blood-stained temples where thousands of captives had met their fate just days before. In the distance, the sound of approaching war drums echoed through the valley. But among the warriors preparing for battle, one man made a choice that would seal his destiny in ways no one could imagine. As enemy forces gathered beyond the lake, he turned his back on everything he had sworn to protect. This was not the end of his story, it was the beginning of his nightmare. To understand what happened to defectors, we must first understand the Aztec military system. The Aztec Empire, known as the Triple Alliance, ruled over much of central Mexico from 1428 to 1521. Their army was not like modern forces. Every able-bodied man was expected to serve when called upon. Military service was not optional. It was a sacred duty. Aztec warriors belonged to various military orders. The most prestigious were the Eagle warriors and Jaguar warriors. These elite fighters wore costumes representing their animal spirits. Below them were common warriors who fought with clubs, spears, and bows. All warriors received training from childhood. Boys learned combat skills alongside their academic studies. The Aztec military operated on strict honor codes. Cowardice in battle brought shame to entire families. Capturing enemies alive was more valued than killing them. Prisoners were taken for ritual sacrifice, which the Aztecs believed kept the sun moving across the sky. This created a unique military culture where warriors sought glory through capture rather than slaughter. Military service in the Aztec Empire was more than a job. It was a religious obligation that connected every warrior to the divine order of the universe. Warriors believed they served the gods through combat, and this belief shaped every aspect of military life. Huitzilopochtli, the god of war and the sun, demanded constant warfare to keep the cosmic order intact. Every battle was a sacred act of devotion, a way to feed the gods and ensure the continuation of life itself. The Aztecs believed that the sun needed human blood to continue its daily journey across the sky. Without constant warfare to provide captives for sacrifice, darkness would consume the world. Warriors were not just soldiers, they were priests of war, performing sacred duties that kept the universe in balance. This worldview made every military campaign a religious mission. Warriors who died in battle or were captured for sacrifice were believed to join the gods in the afterlife, achieving a form of immortality that ordinary citizens could never attain. Training began in childhood. Boys were taught that cowardice was worse than death. Military academies, known as Calmecac for nobles and Telpochcali for commoners, emphasized both combat skills and religious instruction. Students learned that their bodies belonged to the gods, and their deaths in service would be honored for eternity. This indoctrination created warriors who viewed military service as their highest calling. The religious aspect made desertion particularly serious. A defector was not just abandoning his unit, he was turning his back on the gods themselves. The spiritual weight of this act cannot be overstated. Aztec society viewed military deserters as enemies of the divine order, men who had rejected their sacred duty to maintain cosmic balance. Such betrayal was believed to anger the gods and bring disaster upon the entire community. Priests played a crucial role in reinforcing these beliefs. Before major battles, religious ceremonies reminded warriors of their sacred mission. Bloodletting rituals, offerings to war gods, and prophecies from diviners all emphasized the spiritual importance of military service. Warriors who showed hesitation or fear were reminded that their ancestors watched from the heavens and expected courage. The social consequences were severe and far-reaching. Families of defectors faced immediate ostracization from their communities. Neighbors would refuse to speak to them or conduct business with them. Children might be denied education opportunities, as schools feared association with traitors. Marriage prospects disappeared, as families would not risk linking their bloodlines to those marked by shame. Property confiscation was automatic. Houses, land, and personal possessions were seized by the state. Families were often forced to sell remaining belongings to survive. Some were reduced to begging or forced into menial labor. The economic impact could last for generations, as descendants of defectors struggled to rebuild their family's reputation. The shame extended far beyond immediate family members. Extended relatives, friends, and even distant acquaintances might suffer social consequences. Communities kept detailed genealogical records, and the stain of betrayal followed bloodlines for decades. Some families changed their names or moved to distant regions to escape this legacy, though the shame often followed them. This created powerful psychological incentives for warriors to remain loyal, even in the face of certain death. The fear of bringing eternal disgrace upon one's family was often stronger than fear of dying in battle. Warriors knew that cowardice would result in their names being forgotten or cursed, while brave deaths would be celebrated in songs and stories for generations. Rituals surrounding military service reinforced these beliefs daily. Morning prayers, ceremonial weapons blessings, and evening gratitude offerings to war gods reminded warriors of their sacred mission. Even the weapons themselves were considered holy objects, blessed by priests and treated with reverence. To abandon such consecrated tools was to reject divine protection. The concept of Yaalt, divine warfare, permeated Aztec military culture. Warriors believed they were not fighting mere human enemies, but engaging in cosmic battles against darkness and chaos. This spiritual dimension made military service a form of worship and desertion a form of blasphemy. The psychological power of these beliefs cannot be underestimated in understanding why Aztec warriors rarely deserted. Desertion in the Aztec military took several distinct forms, each viewed with different degrees of severity and punished accordingly. The timing and circumstances of abandonment determine not only the immediate consequences, but also the long-term social and spiritual implications for both the defector and his family. Pre-battle desertion was considered the most cowardly form of abandonment and was often punished by immediate death. Warriors who showed cowardice before facing the enemy were seen as corrupting influences whose fear could spread like poison through the ranks. Their panic might cause entire units to break and flee. The Aztec military could not afford such weakness in its ranks, especially when preparing for campaigns that required absolute trust and coordination among soldiers. These pre-battle deserters were often young warriors experiencing their first major campaign. The weight of religious obligation, combined with fear of death, created psychological pressure that some could not bear. However, Aztec society had little sympathy for such weakness. Military leaders believed that fear was a spiritual failing that reflected poorly on one's connection to the war gods. Young warriors were expected to overcome their terror through faith and training. Evidence suggests that some pre-battle deserters were not motivated by cowardice, but by political disagreements or family disputes. Warriors who had fallen out with commanders or felt they were being sent on suicide missions might abandon their units before battle. These cases were treated with particular harshness, as they were seen as deliberate attempts to undermine military authority and morale. Mid-battle abandonment was viewed slightly less severely, though still punished harshly.
Warriors who fled during combat might be given a chance to prove themselves later, especially if they could provide reasonable explanations for their actions. However, repeated offenses usually resulted in execution. The military needed soldiers who would stand their ground regardless of circumstances. These mid-battle deserters often faced immediate pursuit by military police or fellow warriors tasked with bringing them back. Those who were caught typically faced summary court-martial proceedings. If they could demonstrate that their abandonment was due to injury, confusion, or following incorrect orders, they might receive reduced sentences. However, the burden of proof was extremely high, and most such claims were dismissed. Some warriors who abandoned their posts during battle were later able to return and rejoin their units. These cases were rare but not unheard of. Warriors who could prove they had been cut off or misled about battle plans might be given opportunities to redeem themselves through exceptional service in future campaigns. However, their records would always note their previous desertion, making advancement more difficult. Switching sides was the most serious offense and carried the harshest punishments imaginable. These defectors faced treatment that went beyond simple execution. They were considered traitors to their people and their gods simultaneously. Their fate would become a warning to others who might consider similar actions, often involving public torture before death and desecration of their bodies afterward. Side-switching deserters were typically warriors who had been captured by enemy forces and chose to cooperate rather than face sacrifice or death. Some were offered positions of authority in enemy armies, particularly if they possessed valuable intelligence about Aztec military plans or political structure. Others were simply given the choice between death and defection. The Aztec response to side-switching was swift and brutal. Families were immediately arrested and held as hostages. Property was confiscated within hours of the defection being discovered. The defector's name was ritually erased from all official records, as if they had never existed. This erasure was considered essential to prevent the traitor's memory from polluting the community's spiritual purity. Special military units were assigned to hunt down side-switching deserters. These units operated with extraordinary authority and were empowered to use any means necessary to capture or kill the traitors. Rewards were offered for information leading to their capture, and entire communities might be punished if they were found to be harboring defectors.
Political desertion represented another category that carried severe penalties. Warriors who abandoned their posts due to disagreements with military leadership or government policies were treated as dangerous subversives. The Aztec state could not tolerate challenges to military authority, especially during wartime. Such deserters were often subjected to enhanced interrogation to determine if they had shared sensitive information with enemies. Religious desertion occurred when warriors abandoned their posts due to spiritual crises or loss of faith in the war gods. These cases were particularly troubling to Aztec leadership because they suggested that the religious foundations of military culture were weakening. Such deserters were often subjected to religious counseling and forced participation in purification rituals before being allowed to return to service, if at all. Economic desertion involved warriors who abandoned their military duties to pursue personal gain or escape debt obligations. These cases were relatively rare but were punished severely because they demonstrated that material concerns could override sacred duties. The Aztec military needed warriors who placed honor and divine service above personal wealth. Medical desertion occurred when warriors claimed illness or injury to avoid combat. While genuine medical conditions were recognized, false claims were punished harshly. Military physicians examined all such cases, and warriors found to be malingering faced severe consequences. The line between legitimate medical concerns and cowardice was carefully scrutinized. Aztec law regarding military offenses was comprehensive and unforgiving, reflecting the central importance of military service to the empire's survival. The legal code, known as the Tlacuicuiloli, meaning that which is painted, outlined punishments for various crimes, including detailed provisions for military offenses. Desertion carried severe penalties that varied based on circumstances, but death was common for serious offenses. The Tlacuicuiloli was not a single document, but rather a collection of legal precedents, religious injunctions, and military regulations that had been compiled over generations. Military law was considered part of divine law, handed down by the gods through priest-kings and codified by legal scholars. This celestial origin gave military legal decisions enormous weight and made appeals extremely difficult. Military courts operated under a hierarchical system that reflected the empire's social structure. Cases involving noble warriors were heard by councils of high-ranking military officers and priests. Common warriors appeared before local military commanders and district judges. Regardless of social class, however, the fundamental principles remained the same. Military service was sacred, desertion was sacrilegious, and punishment must be swift and severe. Evidence requirements in military cases were stringent, but not impossible to meet. Accused deserters had the right to present their case and call witnesses, but the burden of proof was high for military crimes. Warriors accused of desertion had to prove their innocence, rather than having prosecutors prove guilt. This legal standard reflected the military's need to maintain discipline and the society's belief that desertion was inherently evil. Witness testimony was crucial in military court proceedings. Fellow warriors, commanders, and even civilian observers could provide evidence about a soldier's actions. However, witnesses who testified on behalf of accused deserters risked their own social standing. Communities generally supported military authority, making it difficult for deserters to find advocates. Physical evidence played an important role in desertion cases. Missing weapons, abandoned equipment, and signs of cowardly behavior were all admissible in court. Military police maintained detailed records of troop movements and individual warrior assignments. Deserters who were caught often had difficulty explaining their absence from designated positions. Confession was viewed favorably by military courts, as it demonstrated some degree of remorse and willingness to accept responsibility. Warriors who confessed to desertion might receive slightly reduced sentences, though the fundamental offense remained unchanged. However, forced confessions obtained through torture were generally not admissible, as they were considered spiritually impure. Military courts handled these cases with remarkable efficiency compared to civilian legal proceedings. Officers served as judges, often with the assistance of priests who provided religious context for legal decisions. Evidence was presented and witnesses testified, but the process was streamlined to prevent lengthy delays that could undermine military effectiveness. The accused had certain rights under Aztec law, though these rights were limited compared to modern legal standards. Deserters could speak in their own defense and present evidence of extenuating circumstances. They could request witnesses and challenge the testimony of accusers. However, these rights were balanced against the military's need for swift justice and the society's demand for severe punishment of traitors.
Legal representation was not available in the modern sense, but warriors could be assisted by family members or fellow soldiers who spoke on their behalf. Noble warriors had access to legal advisors who were familiar with military law and could present arguments in accordance with religious and legal precedent. Common warriors typically had to represent themselves or rely on the goodwill of commanders. Appeals were theoretically possible, but extremely rare in practice. The military needed swift justice to maintain discipline and morale. Lengthy legal proceedings could undermine unit cohesion and create uncertainty about the consequences of desertion. Most cases were resolved quickly, with executions often carried out immediately after sentencing to maximize the deterrent effect. The appeals process, when it occurred, involved higher-ranking military officials and sometimes the emperor himself. Cases that reached this level typically involved nobles or warriors whose desertion had significant strategic implications. Even successful appeals rarely resulted in complete acquittal. Instead, sentences might be commuted to slavery or exile rather than execution. Punishment options under military law were diverse and severe. Death by decapitation was the most common sentence for serious desertion offenses. Warriors might also be sentenced to ritual sacrifice, particularly if their desertion had religious implications. Slavery, confiscation of property, and social ostracism were alternative punishments for less severe cases. The legal framework included provisions for rehabilitation of deserters who showed genuine remorse and willingness to serve. Warriors who had deserted due to fear or confusion might be given opportunities to prove their loyalty through exceptional service. However, their records would always note their previous offense, making advancement more difficult and subjecting them to closer scrutiny. Military law also addressed the responsibilities of commanders and units in preventing desertion. Officers who failed to maintain discipline in their commands faced their own legal consequences. Units that experienced high desertion rates might be subjected to collective punishment or reassignment to less prestigious duties. Religious considerations were integrated into every aspect of military legal proceedings. Priests participated in trials, provided spiritual counseling to condemned warriors, and conducted ceremonies before executions. The legal process was viewed as both a practical necessity and a religious obligation to maintain cosmic order. Documentation requirements were extensive, with military courts maintaining detailed records of all proceedings. These records served multiple purposes. They provided precedents for future cases, demonstrated the military's commitment to justice, and created a historical record of disciplinary actions. Family members were often required to acknowledge receipt of legal decisions, further ensuring that the consequences of desertion were widely known. Several historical figures illustrate what happened to defectors, providing concrete examples of how the Aztec military justice system operated in practice. These cases reveal the complexity of desertion, the severity of punishments, and the broader social implications of military betrayal. One such case involved a warrior named Tlacaelel, whose story became legendary throughout the empire. He served in the army during the reign of Moctezuma I, around 1440 to 1469 CE. Tlacaelel was not a common soldier, but a member of the nobility, trained in the Calmecac and destined for military leadership. His family was well respected in Tenochtitlan, with connections to the imperial court and significant land holdings. During a campaign against the Tlaxcalans, Tlacaelel abandoned his unit and fled to enemy territory. The circumstances surrounding his desertion remain unclear, although some sources suggest he had become disillusioned with Aztec military practices or had personal disagreements with his commanders. What is certain is that his defection was discovered quickly and the response was swift and brutal. The Aztec response was swift and brutal, demonstrating the empire's zero tolerance for high-profile desertion. Tlacaelel's family was arrested within hours of his disappearance and held as hostages pending his capture. His elderly parents, his wife, and his 3 children were all imprisoned in separate locations to prevent any coordinated rescue attempts. The family's extensive property holdings were immediately confiscated, with royal officials taking possession of their palace, agricultural lands, and commercial enterprises. Tlacaelel's name was ritually erased from official records. His genealogical listings were destroyed, his military achievements were stricken from honor rolls, and even references to his family's noble status were removed from public documents. This erasure was considered essential to prevent the traitor's memory from polluting the community's spiritual purity. The Aztecs believed that acknowledging a defector's existence gave power to their betrayal.
Special military units were assigned to hunt down Tlacaelel. These units operated with extraordinary authority and were empowered to use any means necessary to capture or kill the traitor. Rewards were offered for information leading to his capture, and entire communities might be punished if they were found to be harboring defectors. The search became a matter of imperial priority, with resources diverted from other military operations. When Aztec forces later captured the town where Tlacaelel had taken refuge, the response was swift and merciless. The warrior was publicly executed in the main plaza,
his death serving as a warning to other potential deserters. His execution was not a simple beheading, but a prolonged ritual that emphasized his betrayal and the justice of his punishment. Priests conducted ceremonies that framed his death as necessary to restore cosmic balance, disrupted by his desertion. The aftermath for Keklayalel's family was devastating and long-lasting. His children were denied education in noble schools and were forced to work as laborers for the rest of their lives. His wife was remarried to a common soldier as punishment, her noble status permanently stripped away. His parents died in prison within 2 years, unable to bear the shame and harsh conditions of their confinement. The family's property was redistributed among loyal military officers and imperial officials. Their palace was converted into a military barracks, and their agricultural lands were given to veterans who had distinguished themselves in service. Even their commercial enterprises were seized and operated by state officials, with profits going to the imperial treasury rather than supporting the family. Keklayalel's story became a cautionary tale told throughout the empire. Parents used his fate to warn children about the consequences of dishonor. Military commanders cited his case when emphasizing the importance of loyalty and discipline. The tale was incorporated into religious ceremonies, with priests using his story to illustrate the dangers of turning away from divine service. Another case involved a group of warriors who deserted during the siege of a rebellious city in the empire's northern territories. These were not individual deserters, but a coordinated group of 12 soldiers who had served together for several campaigns. Their desertion was particularly damaging because it occurred during a critical phase of the siege, when the Aztec forces were preparing for a final assault. The warriors were caught trying to return home without permission, claiming they had received orders from a deceased commander. Investigation revealed that they had forged documents and lied about their mission completion. The military court sentenced them to death, but Moctezuma I commuted their sentences to slavery after considering their previous service records and the possibility that they had been misled by corrupt officials. They were forced to work in the royal gardens for the rest of their lives, a punishment that carried both practical and symbolic significance. The gardens were considered sacred spaces that required constant attention and care. By working there, the former warriors were performing a form of penance while contributing to the empire's spiritual well-being. Their labor was supervised by priests who ensured that their work met religious standards. The transition from warrior to slave was psychologically devastating for these men. They had been trained from childhood to view military service as their highest calling, and their identity was completely wrapped up in their status as soldiers. Being forced to perform menial labor was considered a fate worse than death by many Aztec warriors. Their families suffered similar consequences to Keklayalel's relatives, though somewhat less severe due to the sentence commutation. Family members were not imprisoned but faced social ostracism and economic hardship. Children were denied access to military training and noble education, effectively ending the family's upward mobility within Aztec society. The case highlighted the flexibility within Aztec military law, showing that mercy was possible for warriors who had previously demonstrated loyalty and skill. However, it also demonstrated that even commuted sentences carried severe long-term consequences. The former warriors never regained their freedom or social status, and their families remained marked by shame for generations. A third notable case involved a female warrior named Tzitlali, one of the rare women who achieved military distinction in Aztec society. Tzitlali had earned her place among the Eagle warriors through exceptional courage and skill in combat. Her defection to a rival city-state was considered particularly heinous because it violated gender expectations as well as military obligations. Her desertion occurred during a diplomatic mission that had gone wrong. She had been sent to negotiate with rebellious subjects in the eastern provinces of the empire, but instead chose to remain with the rebels and provide them with military advice. Her knowledge of Aztec tactics and strategies made her a valuable asset to the enemy, increasing the severity of her betrayal.
The punishment for Citlali was more severe than for male deserters, reflecting Aztec beliefs about women's greater responsibility for loyalty and honor. She was captured after 2 years and subjected to a public execution that emphasized both her military treason and her violation of gender norms. Her case became a warning specifically directed at women who might consider similar actions. These historical cases demonstrate the complexity of desertion in Aztec society and the multifaceted nature of military justice. Each case was unique, but all shared common elements: swift response, severe punishment, family consequences, and public example. The stories of these defectors became embedded in Aztec culture, serving as eternal warnings about the price of betrayal and the sacred nature of military service. The arrival of Spanish conquistadors in 1519 created new opportunities and dangers for potential defectors. Hernán Cortés and his men offered an alternative to Aztec rule. Some indigenous warriors saw the Spanish as liberators from Aztec oppression. Several Aztec nobles defected to the Spanish side. Among them was Malintzin, also known as La Malinche. She served as Cortés's translator and advisor. Her defection proved crucial to Spanish success. She provided intelligence about Aztec military plans and political structure. However, most defectors faced dire consequences. The Aztec leadership viewed traitors as worse than common enemies. They were seen as betraying their own people for foreign invaders. Punishments became more severe as the Spanish threat grew. The Aztec response to defection evolved throughout the empire's history. Early conquests were marked by relatively lenient policies. Warriors who showed courage in defeat might be forgiven. The focus was on expanding the empire rather than punishing failures. As the empire matured, policies became harsher. Internal rebellions and external threats made military discipline more critical. Desertion was no longer tolerated. The punishment for leaving one's unit became death in most cases. The final turning point came during the Spanish siege of Tenochtitlan in 1521. As the city fell, many warriors tried to escape. Some attempted to defect to Spanish forces. Cuauhtémoc, the last Aztec emperor, ordered severe punishments for anyone caught trying to surrender. The desperation of the situation made mercy impossible. Aztec punishments for desertion were designed to deter others. Public executions served as warnings. The most common method was decapitation. Warriors were beheaded in front of their units. Their heads were displayed on stakes as examples. Other punishments included being thrown from temple heights. This was reserved for the worst offenders. The religious significance made the punishment more meaningful. Defectors were denied proper burial rites. Their souls were believed to wander the earth as evil spirits. Slavery was sometimes used as an alternative punishment. Deserters might be forced to work in mines or on public projects. This was considered more merciful than death. However, it brought shame to the entire family. Children of enslaved defectors faced social discrimination. The Aztec military used punishment as psychological warfare. Stories of defector executions spread through the ranks. Warriors knew the consequences of abandoning their duties. Fear of punishment helped maintain unit cohesion during difficult battles. Public executions were carefully orchestrated events. They took place before major battles or during religious festivals. Large crowds witnessed the deaths. The message was clear: loyalty was rewarded, betrayal was punished. This system was remarkably effective. Desertion rates remained low throughout the empire's history. Warriors preferred death in battle to the shame of execution. The honor code was stronger than fear of death. Many lesser-known facts reveal the complexity of defection in Aztec society. Some defectors were not motivated by cowardice. Political disagreements or family disputes sometimes drove warriors to abandon their units. These cases were treated differently from battlefield desertion. Women occasionally defected as well. Female warriors existed in Aztec society, though they were rare. When they deserted, punishments were often more severe. Women were expected to be more loyal than men. Their betrayals were seen as particularly damaging. Some defectors were later rehabilitated. Warriors who showed exceptional courage in other situations might have their sentences reduced. The military valued skilled fighters.
talent could sometimes overcome past defenses. Religion played a central role in how defectors were treated. The Aztecs believed that proper death rituals ensured a warrior's place in the afterlife. Defectors were denied these rights. Their souls were condemned to wander as evil spirits.
Sacrificial ceremonies sometimes involved defectors. They might be offered to the gods as punishment for their betrayal. This served multiple purposes. It appeased the gods, warned others, and provided captives for ritual needs. Religious leaders supported harsh punishments for desertion. They believed that military failure angered the gods. Only severe justice could restore divine favor. This gave religious authority to military executions. The families of defectors faced severe social consequences. Children might be denied education or marriage opportunities. Parents could lose their social standing. Extended families suffered as well. The stain of betrayal affected entire lineages. Property confiscation was common. Families lost homes, land, and possessions. They might be forced into poverty. Some were enslaved to pay for the defectors' crimes. The economic impact could last for generations. Some families tried to distance themselves from defectors. They might change their names or move to new communities. However, the shame often followed them. Aztec society kept detailed records of family histories. Aztec military leaders developed strategies to prevent desertion. Units were organized to maintain close supervision. Warriors were assigned to groups with family members or close friends. Loyalty networks helped ensure compliance. Rewards for loyalty were also important. Successful warriors received land grants, titles, and honors. These incentives encouraged continued service. The promise of glory was often stronger than fear of punishment. Military oaths were taken seriously. Warriors swore oaths to their commanders and to the gods. Breaking these oaths brought spiritual consequences. Many warriors believed that oath-breaking would doom their souls. During the Spanish siege of Tenochtitlan, mass desertion became a serious problem. As conditions worsened, some warriors tried to escape. Others attempted to surrender to Spanish forces. The Aztec leadership responded with extreme measures. Cuauhtémoc ordered the execution of anyone caught trying to defect. Guards were posted to prevent escape. Family members were held hostage to ensure loyalty. The desperate situation made normal military discipline impossible. The siege revealed the limits of Aztec military culture. When faced with certain defeat, the honor code broke down. Warriors who had never considered desertion began to flee. The Spanish conquest exposed weaknesses in the system. Spanish conquistadors documented Aztec treatment of defectors. However, their accounts must be viewed with caution. They had reasons to portray Aztec society as barbaric. This bias affects our understanding of historical events. Bernal Díaz del Castillo wrote about witnessing defector executions. His descriptions may have been exaggerated for dramatic effect. Other Spanish sources confirm the general pattern but differ on details. Modern historians must carefully evaluate these accounts. Archaeological evidence provides additional insights. Excavations have revealed execution sites and burial grounds. These findings help confirm some historical accounts while challenging others. The physical evidence adds credibility to written sources. Aztec military justice differed significantly from European systems. European armies also punished desertion severely. However, their methods and motivations were different. Understanding these differences helps explain Aztec behavior. European military law was based on feudal obligations and state authority. Aztec law was rooted in religious beliefs and social honor. This fundamental difference shaped how each society treated defectors. European systems focused on maintaining army effectiveness. Aztec systems emphasized spiritual purity and social harmony. The Aztec approach to desertion had long-term consequences. Strict discipline created effective fighting forces. However, it also created resentment among common warriors.
The gap between noble and common soldiers widened over time. These policies may have contributed to the empire's fall. When faced with Spanish invaders, some warriors were unwilling to fight to the death. The harsh treatment of defectors had created a culture of fear rather than loyalty. This weakness was exposed during the final crisis.
Modern historians have reevaluated Aztec treatment of defectors. Earlier scholarship often portrayed Aztec society as uniquely brutal. Recent research suggests that their policies were similar to other pre-modern military systems. The religious aspects of Aztec military culture are now better understood. Scholars recognize that spiritual beliefs shaped their approach to justice. What seemed barbaric to Spanish observers made perfect sense within Aztec worldview. Archaeological discoveries have provided new insights. Evidence of military camps and execution sites has been found. These findings help historians reconstruct daily life in Aztec armies. The physical evidence often contradicts written sources. Comparing Aztec policies with other ancient civilizations reveals interesting patterns. Roman armies also punished desertion severely. Chinese military codes contained similar provisions. The severity of punishment was not unique to Aztec society. However, the religious dimension was distinctive. Most other civilizations treated desertion as a military crime. The Aztecs viewed it as a spiritual offense. This difference affected how punishments were administered and perceived. The social consequences for families were also more severe in Aztec society. Other civilizations might punish the individual without affecting relatives. Aztec policies created broader social disruption. Desertion had economic consequences for the Aztec Empire. Skilled warriors were expensive to replace. Training programs required significant resources. The loss of experienced fighters weakened military effectiveness. The cost of tracking down defectors was also substantial. Special units were assigned to hunt deserters. These resources could have been used for other purposes. The economic impact was felt throughout the military system. Property confiscation provided some compensation. Families of defectors had their assets seized. However, this created additional administrative burdens. The bureaucracy needed to track and manage confiscated property. Aztec military technology influenced how desertion was handled. Communication was slow and unreliable. News of desertion might take days to reach commanders. This delay affected how quickly punishment could be administered. The terrain also played a role. Dense forests and mountainous regions provided hiding places for deserters. Tracking them required specialized skills and resources. Some deserters successfully evaded capture for years. Weapon technology affected the likelihood of successful desertion. Warriors who abandoned their weapons were less likely to survive. Those who kept their equipment had better chances of escape. Military leaders understood this dynamic. Gender played an important role in how desertion was treated. Male warriors were the primary focus of military policy. However, women who served in military roles faced different consequences. Female deserters were often treated more harshly than men. Aztec society expected greater loyalty from women. Their betrayals were seen as more damaging to social order. The punishment reflected gender-based assumptions about loyalty and honor. Women who defected might be subjected to sexual violence as punishment. This was considered appropriate retribution for their betrayal. Modern scholars recognize this as a form of gender-based persecution. As the Spanish conquest progressed, Aztec military authority began to collapse. Traditional punishments lost their effectiveness. Warriors who had never considered desertion began to flee. The honor code that had maintained discipline was breaking down. Cuauhtémoc's measures could not restore order. Execution of defectors became more common but less effective. The psychological impact of certain defeat undermined military culture. Warriors lost faith in the system that had governed their lives. The final collapse came during the siege of Tenochtitlan. Mass desertion became common. Even elite warriors abandoned their posts. The military system that had sustained the empire for centuries could not survive the Spanish invasion. Archaeological discoveries have provided new insights into Aztec military practices. Excavations at military sites have revealed evidence of executions. Burial sites contain remains of warriors who died in combat and those who were executed.